During my childhood, which could be described as misguided, I resided in what's commonly referred to as the risk zone. My mother was extremely cautious and would become hysterical at any sign of deviance from the norm, likely due to my premature birth and unwarranted fears common among women. As a child, I had little interaction with other kids, and instead of drawing traditional portraits of my parents, I sketched shapeless and unconventional figures. On one occasion, I even gifted my mother a dead sparrow, which I found intriguing as I removed its matchstick legs. Additionally, for some inexplicable reason, I had a strong aversion to boiled food. I would throw tantrums and refuse to eat anything that had been cooked, including meat, soups, and porridge. Consequently, I was added to the list of children deemed at risk of developing schizophrenia, prompting doctors to impose a strict regimen as a preventive measure. This included scheduled walks, simplistic toys, and picture books with chewed-up lettering. People spoke to me with caution, as if approaching a frightened animal. Unfortunately, my mother took things too far. I can still recall the way her eyes bulged with concern, and how she exaggerated every syllable with her round mouth, as if I were intellectually disabled. And so, after successfully overcoming the illness, I was able to attend a regular school like any other child, bringing immense relief to my parents. For the next 8 years, I lived a life filled with the typical ups and downs, facing everyday challenges and surprises. I have a vivid recollection of the day we moved into our new apartment. With the arrival of my sister and the need for additional space, we relocated to a gray high-rise building with an unpleasant scent of urine in the entryway and a broken swing set in the yard. Despite these shortcomings, the apartment itself was decent, and it provided us with much-needed extra room. As I brought in the final box into our new apartment, I made my way to the bathroom to rinse my hands. Despite the apparent renovation of all the other rooms, the bathroom appeared neglected, with dirty tiles, rust stains, and a grimy bathtub. When I turned the faucet on full blast, I was caught off guard by the boiling water that scalded my hand, causing me to yelp in both pain and surprise. My skin turned red, and a large blister formed. In a fit of laughter, I teased my mother, who was visibly squeamish and squirming at the sight of the blister, threatening to puncture it with a large needle. I suggested to my dad that it would be worth investigating the issue with the pipes, but the subsequent times I turned on the faucet, the water was already at a normal temperature. One night, I woke up feeling the urge to use the bathroom. As I walked barefoot down the dark hallway, I noticed the bathroom door was slightly ajar, and to my surprise, there was a peculiar aroma of something edible emanating from within. Without jumping to any conclusions, I turned on the light and cautiously entered the bathroom. Upon entering the bathroom, I discovered the bathtub filled to the brim with oily water, with shiny circles of fat floating on the surface. Squinting against the bright light, I leaned over the unappetizing concoction and turned my head to the right, only to be met with a surprising sight. Someone was already in there, staring back at me. The woman's eyes were white and bulging, reminiscent of 2 hard-boiled eggs. Her skin appeared bloodless and covered with a slimy film, with patches peeling off her head, revealing bubbling blood on the white bone of her skull. My throat felt swollen, preventing me from yelling properly. Instead, a feeble and humiliating sound escaped my lips. Aye. To my dismay, the loathsome creature then opened its bloated fat lips and repeated my pitiful noise exactly. Startled, I stumbled backwards and would have toppled over if not for the wall behind me. A forceful blow to the back of my head propelled me towards the door. I slammed it shut with all my might and locked it, seeking refuge inside the room. Trembling uncontrollably, I couldn't discern whether it was fear, disgust, or shock that was consuming me. I decided not to awaken anyone. Unsure of how to explain the disturbing encounter, the thought persisted in my mind that if I allowed myself to drift off to sleep, the creature would slither out of the bathroom on its fused and flaccid limbs and loom over me with its lifeless, white eyes when I opened mine. However, the next thing I knew, it was morning and I had passed out. Upon awakening, my immediate instinct was to make my way to the bathroom. Being a seasoned aficionado of horror, I was inexplicably drawn to the safety of daylight. To my surprise, The bathtub was completely dry, devoid of any water or oily residue. When my mother reprimanded me for causing a disturbance in the middle of the night, I had to fabricate a story about accidentally colliding with the door in the darkness to explain the loud noise. The sheer absurdity of the situation left me feeling demoralized. It was a strange combination of revulsion and empathy, akin to witnessing a helpless dog writhing in pain on a busy highway. Despite its apparent vulnerability, the entity in the bathroom still instilled fear within me. Memories of my anxious childhood made me hesitant to make light of the situation, lest I be deemed unstable and institutionalized once more. I was at a loss for a solution. Should I simply forego bathing altogether? Perhaps summon a priest? However, my skepticism extended to religious intervention as much as it did to the existence of ghosts. For several nights, there was no sign of activity, and I even walked past the bathroom a few times during the night, without noticing any smells or the faint sound of water. As long as I stayed away from that room, I convinced myself that everything was under control. However, during dinner, my eyes darted up, and I was met with the horrifying sight of a dripping, unclothed cadaver standing in the kitchen doorway, its skin hanging in shreds. I attempted to scream, but the food lodged in my throat, causing me to gag and struggle to breathe for what felt like an eternity. The figure before me didn't resemble a typical ghostly apparition. Rather, she was corporeal and tangible, standing before me as solid as any living person. Notably, she was entirely devoid of hair, with smooth, pale skin that reminded me of the texture of a beluga whale's skin. The rubbery flesh stretched over her bony limbs, which lacked any substantial muscle mass and were instead covered in flaps of loose skin. Her palms and feet were the only areas with any notable flesh remaining. What struck me the most was the overpowering stench emanating from her, akin to a meaty broth infused with spices, akin to boiled meat. Despite the unsettling odor, my stomach churned, and I realized with amusement that hunger was causing my gut to grumble and twist, having missed my meal. I was receiving my grandmother's special treatment, which involved an injection below my waist, while my mother's intense gaze towards my father hinted, "Here we go again." Unfortunately, I didn't have the chance to clarify the situation. As you return home, minding your own business and confidently holding your opinions on every matter, it all comes crashing down with the intrusion of an event that defies logic and exists independently. It's like a nightmare where the absurdity of what's happening renders you powerless, preventing you from taking sensible actions, making coherent decisions, or seeking advice from a friend. Despite my tormenting shame, the fear remained constant and unrelenting. Throughout the night, I couldn't stop thinking about the woman and the overwhelming premonition that our paths would cross again. The anxiety and sense of helpless anger only grew stronger. And as fate would have it, I encountered her the next morning when I went to rinse my head under the cold water stream. She remained motionless in the tub, and suddenly her hand emerged from the water, half bare of flesh and bone. The fingers appeared softened and resembled overcooked sausages. I believe she was attempting to write something on the wall, but her fingers simply contorted before the flesh disintegrated, leaving only her bony knuckles behind. The water was filled with floating loose fingernails. The sight made me sick, and I threw up outside the bathroom door. Greetings, childhood memories. Once again, I found myself disgusted by the taste of boiled food, particularly boiled chicken with its white, blistered skin and slimy texture. If you were to tear apart a piece of boiled meat, it would seem like the skin was shedding in thin strips. The sickening aroma of the broth lingered with me throughout the day, a constant reminder of my distaste. As night fell, I experienced an intense sensation of gradually boiling alive, like specific parts of my body were being subjected to heat. The strange, hot weight felt as if someone were placing red-hot metal weights on my arm, then on my stomach, and finally on my legs. If I were to bring my hands up to my face at that moment, I would imagine seeing scalded, white stumps. The bathroom was just beyond the wall, and I knew she was inside. I couldn't help but imagine her crawling towards me, using the remaining strength of her legs, if she really wanted to. For 5 consecutive days, I remained in bed without getting up. At times, my mind cleared and I felt an urge to escape my current state, but the thought of my condition made me nauseous. My grandmother, however, had a different perspective. She believed that the horror had latched onto me, choosing me for some reason, and now rested on my shoulders. Unless I found a way to rid myself of it, the horror would continue to torment me in various ways. The horror was not omnipresent, but had become a part of me. And no matter where I went, even in the confines of an underground bunker, I could not escape it without taking action. It was like the power of self-confidence that protected against a vampire. But the dead did not care about their past and continued to fill the voids left behind. Life went on for them. I requested that my father gather information about the previous owner of our apartment and inquire about any past incidents with our neighbors. However, the individuals who sold us the apartment were uncooperative and unwilling to provide any information. Realizing their greediness, my father fell silent for a brief moment before abruptly standing up and leaving. It was through his investigation that we eventually uncovered the truth. Marina, a 26-year-old woman, resided in the same apartment complex as me, along with her young son, who also shared my name, Vlad. Unfortunately, it was not meant to be. Marina had left her husband, a known alcoholic and two-time offender for theft and rape. He suddenly became religious after joining some sort of sect. According to the neighbors, he frequently came to their apartment and attempted to break down the door. When he failed, he resorted to yelling degrading comments about his wife, such as accusing her of prostitution and performing sexual acts for a meager amount of money. Marina would eventually open the door in tears, hoping to avoid any further disturbance. The neighbors were aware of the physical abuse that Marina had to endure from her husband. However, despite this, they still claimed that no one expected that, the age-old excuse. The husband's roof had started leaking, and Marina threatened to report him to the authorities, which may have triggered his final act. According to reports, the man subjected Marina to a horrific ordeal. He allegedly scalded her face with boiling water, which he had taken from a kettle. It is unknown whether he had been drinking or not, but he then proceeded to lock her inside the bathroom and placed every available pot of water on a large fire. While Marina was in the bathtub, he ran hot water and began to playfully submerge her until the water eventually boiled. Despite suffering multiple burns from the scalding water, Marina was still alive. The neighbors could only hear the drunken shouts of the man, referring to Marina as a sinner and making references to boiling tar. Despite the disturbing sounds, nobody thought to intervene. However, the cries of Marina's 3-year-old son could be heard for over an hour in the adjacent room, which happens to be my current residence. The police arrived on the scene and forcefully entered the apartment. According to reports, Marina was still alive for a few more minutes after their arrival. However, her neck was constricted with a belt from a robe. When they attempted to remove it, the belt slipped off with ease, taking pieces of her skin along with it. It became evident that she was beyond saving. Her clothes had to be removed, along with the skin that came off with the belt, making it a truly gruesome sight. Reportedly, individuals who were present on the scene had to remove Marina's body from the bathtub while wearing gloves. They had to fish out pieces of her body one by one, much like retrieving boiled fish from a soup. The skin, which was peeling off, and strands of hair, which had adhered to the walls, were scraped off and gathered in a bag. The neighbors, who had grown anxious, began searching for Marina's young son. Their search led them to the kitchen, where they discovered his body curled up in an embryonic position inside a tall enameled pot. The pot was devoid of any contents. I cannot fully recall hearing about it in the news or hearing anyone discuss it. Even the neighbors appeared to act as if nothing had happened. This experience led me to realize that for those still living, another person's death can often become just another statistic, more than the person responsible. I found myself harboring animosity towards Marina. Why did she persist in bothering me? And what did I have to do with her? Her eyes lacked any discernible expression, and her mouth did not convey any requests. Yet she seemed to require something from me. On my final night at home, I lay in bed with one hand over my eyes and the other hanging off the edge. The scent of meat still lingered in my nose. Suddenly, a wet, soft sensation brushed against my palm, akin to a wet dog's nose. Yet we didn't have any dogs. I consented to be taken to the clinic without any objections. It was understood that I would receive medical care. My mother expressed despair that they couldn't be saved. My father avoided looking at me, and my grandmother kept lamenting about her horror. I struggled to understand what their pain and suffering had to do with me. It appeared that the ordeal was finally over, though it didn't feel like it involved me. Currently, I lay on a comfortable and fresh bedsheet, lost in random thoughts. I even found myself longing for my academic pursuits, let alone the company of my friends. The faint footsteps of a nurse caught my attention as she approached to check my IV, and a breeze of air swept over me as she leaned to adjust my pillow. I opened my eyes. My cheek is affectionately caressed by a bloated wet hand, while heavy eyelids cover blind white eyes. "Growing up," says Vlad, his lips sprawled, revealing teeth resembling a horse's skull and an incessantly grinning mouth. "Yes," I reply wearily, shutting my eyes once more. "Yes, mother, yes."